all about writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 13, part 2 of our series on getting started. I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher.
And I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter. Today, we're going to be diving into the process of getting started, and in particular, how to choose what genre or style do you want to write in. So, first question is, what's a genre? Maybe it's something you haven't heard of before. So let's start there with how do we define a genre? What kinds of genres are there? And how do you choose which one's right for you? What do you think, Sara?
I think, first and foremost, that we need to establish that there are umbrellas to genres, and then there are subgenres within those. And a genre, just to put it out there, is, in my own words, a genre is a specific trope, if you will, of storytelling where, for instance, a good obvious one would be romance. Is a genre of fiction, and it's always a fiction in a way. I mean, yes, there's fiction and nonfiction, but within the fiction genre, you have broad umbrella names to those genres. So there's romance, there's fantasy, there's sci-fi, there's historical fiction, there's there's even like just regular fiction, kind of like,
like there's literary fiction.
Yes. Yeah. So there's these really kind of bigger ones that I just named, and then within there are subgenres. And so for the easiest one to do is the romance genre. Romance genre is really big. It's a huge umbrella for a genre name. And once you say I write romance, people want to know what kind. And by that they mean, do you write thriller romance? Do you write cozy mystery romance? Do you write sweet romance? Do you write spicy romance? Do you write vampire meets werewolf meets shapeshifter romance? I mean, there's so many subgenres within that heading that you do get to get a little bit detailed, depending, even within the sci-fi and fantasy genres, there's steampunk fantasy or whatever. Like, you can get really specific. And so I think that, that first and foremost is what we needed to establish, is what exactly is it. And it's huge.
Yep. And I think that as a new author coming at this, depending on how you're wired, this can either be completely overwhelming because there's so many different kinds of genres to choose from, or it can be very, very validating. Like I know exactly what I am, and I can narrow it down to this sub genre. That is what I am. That's great. But I think for a lot of authors who are just new to this, they may have a bit of an idea. Well, yeah, I'm writing in the past, so I guess I'm historical fiction, but where do I go from there? And the reason why you want to ask this as an author isn't just so that you can define it to yourself, but also when you get into the industry, the publishers and the bookstores, be they online or brick and mortar, they want to know what you are because they want to define you, which I know as artists, sometimes we don't want to be defined. I have met quite a few authors who are, I don't really fit into any genre. Fine, that's valid. And it could be that you don't. But you still have to kind of pick a side, pick a team and say, okay, I am in team fantasy, or I am ultimately in team romance, but I write all kinds of different kinds of romance, but really I'm in romance. So I think when you're thinking about what genre are you going to write, you have to go into it with a sense of, I think I'm this kind of writer. Like, this is my writing is. So maybe I should know a little bit about how that genre is written, because there are different norms in the different genres. And as an author, it's a good idea to at least have a sense of what they are. Even if you're going to break every norm that exists, you still need to understand what they are. Now, you write a lot of historical fiction, Sarah. So have you come across any, like you said, any tropes that are required of historical fiction, or no-nos you got to stay away from with historical fiction?
Well, the first one is the one that you and I always fight about whenever you're dealing with my books, which is traditionally historical fiction is written in past tense, and I write in present.
Yeah.
But there usually historical accuracy is a big requirement of that, from the clothing to the speaking to the societal norms that you're presenting in that time period, because the goal is, for that genre, your purpose is to provide a window into the past, but kind of bring it to life in a way that is unique and entertaining and a little educational. Whereas other genres, there's no element of education. In fantasy and sci-fi, you're making up all new rules.
Whoa. No, carry on, please.
No,
Allow me to.
you're not, you get to make up the rules of your world in a way
Yeah.
that is not like, I'm going to educate you how it was to be a woman in 1702. Instead, it's I'm going to educate you on the fun rules or fantasy or strict, societal norms of my made up world that takes place 5,000 years in the future. And so it's a very different type of, expectation for that genre. And I think too, romance, again, I'm going to come back to it just because, I've spent time in that genre, going to RWA conferences and speaking at them. And, there are very strict rules when it comes to romance writing. There are expectations there's a contract that before the reader even opens that first page, they expect to meet the two main characters within a fraction of, within paragraphs. They expect to understand the conflict right away. They expect there to be a 3-act structure. They expect the happily ever after, and usually they expect sex. And if you don't have those elements, you will not succeed in that genre because you break the contract with the readers who have expectations of that genre. And so you need to know that going in. So if you're like, I don't write made up things. Well, you might want to stick in either a modern, literature space where you're talking about real world, real life experiences, or the past, but maybe not sci-fi or fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you're right. It is important to understand what the expectations of your genre are. Romance, you're right. I remember when I first looked at romance, it was incredible how exquisitely precise the restrictions were. It has to be this many words. Like it was clearly defined. And so there wasn't a lot of room to grow. But you have to understand that you're writing for the readers as much as you're writing for yourself. And so if the readers expect a certain thing, then you need to provide that. If you're particularly talented at your craft, you can provide that with an original twist. Sure, you can do that and your fans will probably love it. But you still need to understand the rules. Now, if I can defend science fiction for a second, there is definitely
making fun of it.
there is one kind of sci-fi. This is important. Like if you say you're thinking, oh, I want to be a science fiction writer. Well, there is one kind of sci-fi, which is a very big subgenre called hard sci-fi, which means your science has to be accurate and it has to be in keeping with the modern laws of physics as we understand them today. You cannot break the laws of physics. Yeah, it's a huge subgenre, hard sci-fi. And I have found, because I don't write hard sci-fi, that a lot of the criticisms that will come the way of my books is people who are saying, oh, never happen. Well, no. And if I was writing hard sci-fi, I know that, and I wouldn't have written that. But I like dinosaur pirates in space, so I'm not writing hard sci-fi. I'm writing space fantasy at that point. Like I'm almost not even in sci-fi anymore. I'm sort of going over into fantasy. But like you said, if as a writer, if you don't want to deal with make-believe stuff, then there's certain genres that you just aren't going to go to. But if you love sort of twisting reality into some other kind of new way, well, then there are other genres that are closed to you, like contemporary romance or contemporary anything for that matter. And historical romance too has to be accurate, because you're right, Sarah, the fans know their stuff. The casual fan is just enjoying it, but the hardcore fans, they know exactly what kind of Smith & Wesson was available in 1876, and you better get it right.
They'll
So,
look it up for you. Like
yeah,
they'll check. That'll be a Goodreads review. This fact
yeah,
is not correct. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so like if you're writing all kinds of different genres, one question you want to ask yourself is, do I like doing research? Because if you don't like doing research and you want to just kind of, use your imagination and have fun, there are definitely some genres you should stay away from. Historical romance being one, hard sci-fi being another. But then you can get into things like horror. Like, oh man, like you are just blasting away from reality there with horror. But you can also write horror in an extremely gritty, realistic way. If that's your shtick, but you still want to have that element of the fantastic, you can. So there are lots of, I guess what we're saying here is there's lots of, not exceptions, but there's lots of ways to bend the rules or to play within the rules as they're established and change it and make it new and original. But it still doesn't get away from the fact that you need to understand what genre you're writing in and what the expectations are.
And I want to also say too, I mean, as much as we say rules are made to be broken, I think you can break established rules of that genre when you have a following and a name for yourself within that genre, because then you can kind of start to cartwheel away from the requirements.
Yeah.
Because no matter how good your writing is, if you're coming in as a newbie in any genre you choose, and you're like, well, I'm just going to do it, but I'm going to break all the rules, because you haven't established a relationship with a following or for yourself, it will fall flat. It's why, it's if you go to 100 agents and say, I am writing steampunk punk fantasy, but I'm breaking all the rules doing it, they're going to be like, yeah, but like you haven't tried yourself in the marketplace yet, and we don't know how this will go. You have to ease into doing more exotic experimentation within the genre. It's the breakout book that can come out as a debut doing that is rare, and it's almost it's a zeitgeist moment that you can't control. It just is sheer luck of when it got published and it took off.
Yeah.
So it's just not a great way to kind of go in from the hip into it as a new author.
And sometimes you'll think you're writing in one genre, but you'll actually discover, no, actually I'm not. I'm actually writing in this genre. Like if maybe you just don't know what's out there and say, well, I want to write hard sci-fi, but I'm going to break all the rules. I guarantee you're not writing hard sci-fi then, because that by the definition doesn't exist. So, actually you're writing space fantasy.
I had the same thing happen to me when I was at a writing retreat, and I was like, I write historical fiction, and then having the feedback from some of these other established writers, and they're like, you do, but really you're kind of a literary fiction writer. Like you skew heavily literary compared to a standard historical fiction book. And I was like, I do? So yeah, that was a surprise, and I've been writing for forever. I mean, I guess I've always kind of known I've skewed more literary, but to hear it said so bluntly, that was a surprise, and I've been writing for a decade.
Yeah.
I also think too, something we want to talk about too is and I don't know if you were going to mention this, but don't chase genres either. I think that's something that is important to know when you're getting started, or trying to decide the definition of the genre you write. Obviously pick something that speaks to you, that you enjoy, that you love doing. That kind of guides you automatically, but also don't chase trends either, because it might not be something you love. So to do it just to chase a trend it won't be
Oh yeah,
fun, and it'll show in your writing. And two, chances are by the time it's done, that ship has sailed, right?
that's right. Absolutely. And we could do a whole podcast on that one. So let's put a pin in that one. But I agree with you 100%. Um, when I think about what genre an author's going to choose to write in, like if you're just getting started, you're just thinking, okay, I'm going to start writing. Where am I going to go? I mean, I do encourage every aspiring author to start with what's inside you. I mean, first of all, what do you love? What is exciting for you? What inspires you? And what do you know? I mean, we were always told, write what you know, but maybe what you know isn't actually something you want to write about. Well, fair enough, but you know lots of stuff. It isn't just what your job is. It's your life experiences. It's where you live. It's the other things that you read and you've picked up along the way, hobbies that you have. There's lots of things that you as an aspiring author know that you can lean on to write a book. And like, it doesn't have to be a direct thing either. If you, I don't know, you love gardening, you don't want to write a book about gardening, but your knowledge of plants has given you, a great basis to be able to write a cool, environmental techno thriller. You have to make up all the spies and big corporations and stuff, but the basics of how plants work, and that's really cool. And that's where you can go with it. But if you're not inspired by the genre that you've chosen, you're probably not going to do very well in it. So you got to love it. You got to read a lot of it, and you got to, yeah, this is what gives me joy. This is where I want to go. So that's the first place you start, is just what's inside you.
I want to touch on that just a little bit of what you just said too, Ben, is that you have to read a lot of it. And that's something that, especially if you want to write in a different genre than you've been writing, or you think that this is the genre that you want to write in, or just I'm going to write a book and I've been reading hundreds of this particular type of genre. Chances are, if it's on the stack of favorite books, like if you've got a stack of books on your nightstand and you look and 70% of them are one type of genre or kind of are living in that space, that's probably where you will feel the most comfortable when
Mm-hmm.
you're writing, if you're choosing a genre, if you haven't already, or if you are thinking, where am I going to start? Like, start by reading your favorites and seeing what inspires you there, because I know that writing historical fiction was so, and we've talked about what inspires us, right? Like, I was so inspired by countless historical fiction books and mythology books and things that I just found so enjoyable, that was, I think, what kind of carried me down the path of writing in the genres I write about. And
Mm-hmm.
and where I live, if I have a choice, I write nonfiction, yes, but because of my day job, not because I read nonfiction for fun, like all the time. I don't. It's not my go-to genre. So that's another way to guide yourself too, is what do I love reading? Maybe that's where I will love writing.
Yep. Yep. And sometimes, I mean, you can also mix genres as well. If, let's say, your knowledge and what you know is in one area, but what you really love is over here, use your imagination. You can find ways to combine the two into something cool. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. The
You did
first
that.
series, yeah, absolutely. The first series that I wrote is military sci-fi, which is not a very big genre. There's not a lot out there. You got to look for it. And I wanted to write about space adventure because I love space adventure, but I couldn't come up with anything good because it was all kind of vague and I don't know. I just don't want to do Star Wars again. I don't know. And then I just I I just leaned into all of my military experience, thinking, well, that's pretty cool, but it would be even cooler if it was in space. And so I just took a lot of my knowledge of the military and I plunked it into high space fantasy and went from there and was able to do exactly what I wanted, even before I knew what I wanted to do. So you can certainly take like two genres like science fiction and military, and put them together and make something. And that genre might already exist. You just didn't know about it until you went looking. So, yeah.
I agree. I think that's maybe a place to leave everybody, is the hope, the light of, even if you think what your genre is super far out there, chances are it's already out there, and you will find your tribe of people. No matter how bizarre you think your topic is, you're not alone out there in your genre. So go
That's
hunt
right.
for it, read it, and dive in. That's a truth, I think, that
Absolutely. People are waiting for what you were going to write.
yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
They're out
true.
there somewhere.
It's true. So, all right. Well, that's the tip of the iceberg on genre. I think we're going to be diving into each genre, I hope, in detail as we go forward, as well as some of our other topics. But that's our show for today. Don't forget to subscribe, everybody, so you don't miss our chats. And feel free to leave a review, which really, really helps us a lot. And just as a note, if anyone is looking for help getting their book ready for the world, Ben and I would love to recommend our friends at Cascadia Author Services. You can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com.
And if you want to catch up with Sara, you can find her at saradahman.com and on Instagram.
And you can find Ben at Bennett R. Coles, as well as Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics you'd like us to cover. We'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.